African American Legends highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, education, and youth services. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they had been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr. Joining me on today's program is Alfonso Wyatt, Vice President of the Fund for the City of New York, who is very interested in youth and other developments in our community. As someone who's interested in youth, someone who's had experience with the ministry and the clergy, could you give us a little background about the origin and scope of youth-serving agencies in the country and the city? Because youth-serving agencies per se have a relatively recent history, but they also have a long and distinguished history. So could you tell us a little about that?
Right. It's been a tradition in this country to work with young people in a variety of capacities. Some would think about the group homes, the boys' towns way back in the turn of the 19th century, and working its way on up. I think youth services, especially as it relates to inner city in this country, is a relatively new phenomenon in terms of how it has been funded by government and now defunded by government and its overall development. We've had youth service organizations such as the Police Athletic League, the Boys Club, the Girls and Boys Club, going back in the early 30s, moving up into the present time. Right now, we have a rich array of community-based organizations providing much-needed services throughout the city, and I'm proud to say that I was part of the movement back some 20-some-odd years ago as a young student fresh out of Howard University, working in the community, and from there I went into education and so on.
One of the distinguished black heroines, Mary McLeod Bethune, was in charge of youth services for the African American community in the Roosevelt administration in the 30s, and together with other black executives in government, she served as chair of what was called Franklin Roosevelt's Kitchen Cabinet, who were blacks who advised the president. I was very fortunate that my father was Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Sr., was in charge of health for blacks in the 30s and 40s and served with Mary McLeod Bethune. But her base was youth services because the Roosevelt administration and those people around Roosevelt, Harry Hopkins and others, recognized the importance of focusing on youth, because prior to that, social services had more or less focused on families and groups.
Right.
Then more recently in New York City, you had the Youth Board, and now the Division for Youth,
right,
which focuses specifically on youth. Yet at the same time, in the private sector, we have organizations like the Y and the Boys and Girls Club, the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Now, how do their initiatives differ from the initiatives of these community-based youth-serving organizations?
Community-based organizations generally, just what they said, some of the organizations that you named are national organizations. Community-based organizations are right in the community. They work with the young people, and really good comprehensive programs work with the entire family and community. If we look at how funds are targeted to communities, and if we put youth in the center and put families in terms of looking at concentric circles, put family right there, community, schools, and other institutions such as penal institutions, et cetera, generally we find that funds are targeted to the furthest ring away from young people in terms of youth development. Community-based organizations that are steeped in the philosophies of youth development are able to really shape and to nurture the whole child, to look at how you can build an independent, not build, but as much as facilitate an independent structure, a feeling of self-worth, dignity, respect, and a sense of purpose. Community-based organizations that are really good are the lifeblood of this city. To me, they are the invisible glue that holds the town together. They work with young people, they help them to aspire, they make connections. Everybody needs somebody. Everybody needs someone to open up a door or to give a word of encouragement. Community-based organizations generally are able to do that and they're able to employ young people. When we talk about the high dropout rates, when we talk about young people not being able to find jobs, community-based organizations have taught work skills, work readiness skills, and in many instances have been able to provide the opportunity for young people to find jobs.
Well, you used the term the whole child, the holistic approach. And that somewhat differs from youth-serving organizations back in the 40s and 50s, where they're concerned with preventing delinquency,
Right.
or preventing truancy, or preventing teenage pregnancy. The organizations seem to be more like slivers, focusing on particular aspects of youth behavior. Now you're suggesting that there's a holistic approach, and the organizing rubric is what you call the community-based organization.
Right.
Now, how are those organizations formed? Does somebody like you just dream them up, or does somebody at the top say, well, look, you guys organize a youth organization, or does it come spontaneously, or does it come from the church?
Okay.
How does that happen?
Well, let's go back to the first part of your question, because I think you put your finger on a very important change. Many programs was funded to respond to deficits, what a child did not have, or what a problem. And if that was teen pregnancy, if that was an issue that related to dropout prevention, et cetera, those deficit-funded programs became larger and larger, and the deficits remain. That's part of the problem that we find ourselves in right now. We're talking about now building on strengths, dealing on assets and attributes, positive components of a young person. So if we have someone, let's build on their strength. They may not be all that they can be in one area, but they're very strong in the sense that they're going to school.
Okay, let's give an example. Somebody who's gotten into trouble for robbing a store. That's a deficit.
Right.
And you say that person has strengths, and we want to look for those strengths. What might those strengths be, and how do you look for them?
Let's look at the fact that they robbed a store, and we found out that they're leaders. They have leadership ability, that they were able to influence some other young people to go in with them. We could take those leadership abilities and begin to build on that foundation. Perhaps this young person can organize a community speak out against violence, against crime. Perhaps this young person has some skills where they're able, they have artistic ability. So they're in charge of an art program that they could teach younger children. If you build on the attributes, you leave yourself much more room to be able to touch a broader spectrum of people, rather than narrowly defining and narrowing down in this treatment mode in terms of what you need or what you do not have.
How much of this philosophy comes from your theological background?
Well, I wish I could take credit for a lot of it. I think a lot of it comes from there, but I've been influenced by Michelle Cahill, who is a leading thinker in youth development, and Karen Pittman. Michelle Cahill is also a vice president at the Fund for the City of New York.
By the way, could you tell us a little something about the Fund for the City of New York?
All right. The Fund for the City of New York is an operating foundation. We work with government and not-for-profit organizations. We work particularly with youth-serving organizations in a variety of ways. We have a cash flow loan program where we're able to loan organizations up to $50,000. Those organizations waiting on monies to come down either from the city, from city government, from local state government, or even from the federal government. We have a nonprofit computer exchange where we're able to help organizations develop their computer capacity. We're also able to work through a number of our grant programs to coordinate our efforts. The theological aspect of Alfonso is fundamental to what I'm talking about. I've been blessed to be able to be a role model to young people. I couldn't count how many young people I've been able to help just by being at a particular place at a particular time. More importantly, I think I've been able to help shape organization and organizational thinking about how to develop young people, that you can be firm but still be expectant in terms of and allowing for a latitude of behavior as a person moves through their life cycle. no one is perfect. Young people are not perfect. And I don't even think they're that much different than young people from whatever generation you would want to target in. Young people have their own music, they have their own hairstyles, they have their own way of doing. I remember my father talking about that zoot suit that made his mother upset, and the drapes and the chain. I think you may remember some of that. So now young people now, what's making adults upset is that their pants is hanging down a little lower, and they got their own music, but then jazz was music, and some people thought that that was going to be an evil influence. But for me, in terms of looking at the spectrum and looking at, as a minister, I am an ordained clergy person. I'm on the staff of the Allen AME Church, where the pastor is the Reverend Congressman Floyd
Reverend
H.
Congressman.
Oh, well, let's do an update. Reverend Dr. Congressman, he just got his D-Min. And so that has been really exciting to look at how you can translate this asset model, which definitely Allen builds on in terms of community development, in terms of the development of people. So yes, there is a very clear thread, a spiritual thread, because a lot of what we're facing is not just programmatic issues. And unfortunately, the spiritual aspect of development has been framed within a political context. Caring is not a political act. Caring is, to me, is what distinguishes us as human beings, our ability to care for and about others.
Let's put the converse. Not caring is a political act.
Amen. 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 Amen.
Well, let's talk about the Fund for the City of New York's Youth Development Initiative, which you really created.
Well, I'm going to say that I'm a part of it. I think it was a synergistic meeting. Mary McCormick, the president of the Fund for the City of New York, and the various others who have come through, the Sue Bellingers, and now Michelle Cahill, come together to create what I think is a very exciting initiative. And we're able to look at youth development from a number of perspectives, from the theoretical to the practical. Our ability to work with organizations that serve young people around the city, and we're talking about hundreds of organizations. We're talking about large, medium-sized, founder-led organizations. My heart particularly goes out for those community-based organizations, those ma and pa organizations. And I've even met people who self-fund their organization because they believe that they must do something about youth and the plight of youth in their community. And they are, to me, they are the heroes and sheroes that and also legends in the community's mind that make a big difference. I met a young man, well, he's not a young man, he's older than I am, but I met this man, and he was arrested some 20 some odd years ago. And for over 20 years, he has used his own resources to take young people up to various prisons. They play basketball, they meet inmates, they talk, and the inmates tell him, don't come here. This is not the place for you. Now, he does not have to do that. And the fact that he's done it for 20 years on his own, to me, he's emblematic of a number of people who are doing, I think, just great work, unrecognized and unheralded.
Well, given all this great work and the initiatives, why is it that society in general has such a negative impression of youth, particularly minority youth?
I think one of the most heinous acts that have been perpetrated on young people is making them the root cause of all of our problems. I've never heard of a young person hiring or having the resources to smuggle in drugs into the community, or I've never heard of a young person setting up elaborate schemes to launder money. I've never heard of some of the things that young people have, been blamed for, like the shift from a manufacturing economy to a technological society where young people are not fitting in because of the school system and their inability to cope with the changes. I think that one of the things that we've done is we look at young people in one dimension as consumers, and we use their backs as billboards. We use their heads to hang hats with messages on it. We get a lot of free advertising for young people, but we're not putting in on the development side the same type of money, resources, or energy.
Well, let's take music. You talked about the young people having their own music. Much of that music, not much, but a good amount of it, has lyrics that are misogynist, that emphasize violence, that emphasize prejudice. It might be suggested that their music is just reflecting the society, but why do they like it?
Why they like it, I guess, is the same reason that people liked Elvis Presley, that he was different. Their parents didn't like it, and
I mean, even some of the language which I couldn't use on this program, they really like that.
I don't know if they like it as much as just gotten used to the language. And I'm not here to say that this is right.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that young people do have, and not all young people like misogynistic lyrics or are out to destroy the community. There are some young people who are making a lot of money, and there's some folk who stand in the background who make more than they do.
Right.
So if I can promote a particular image that, in a sense, is going to sell more albums, more tapes, more. You could tell I'm talking about albums.
Yeah, that shows how old you are.
Maybe in the legend category. More CDs. Let's update that. Then I'm going to create that type of atmosphere in camp. When you look at a famous person like an Ice-T or an Ice Cube, I get my ices mixed up sometimes, and they're able to sell a particular product just because of name recognition, that someone else created the public relations arena for them to be able to do that. It all boils down to money. And looking at young people as consumers, and within that rebellion period, we're going to make as much money as we can. But the demonization of young people is one of the things that we've paid for. And it is not just inner city youth. I remember turning on the television one early Saturday morning, and I saw a 4-year-old in some type of French jean with a derriere being exposed and some kind of subtitles. I guess that makes it nice because it's foreign. And I said, my God, what is going on? How do we really see our young people?
Well, let's go to violence. Violence is endemic to American society. We conquered the country with violence. We eliminated a lot of the Native American population. We brought slavery with violence. We fought the greatest war in the Civil War about economics, although we said it was about slavery. What's your suggestion? What is your initiatives? What are some of the ideas that you have in mind and others in your network about dealing with youth violence?
I think if we develop the whole child, and going back to the youth development philosophy, if we look at the core needs and competencies that a young person needs in order to develop, when we look at the role of a helping person, we find in all of the literature on resiliency that we find that a single adult, caring adult, can make a critical difference. And when we look at all of what's going on in the community, we have to find ways to marshal the resources to help a young person and to help institutions that serve young people to say that you are important. They're not dumb. Young people see the deal. They know what's going on. They look out. They don't see employment opportunities. They see people going to school, going to college, still can't find jobs. We're in competition with cutthroat drug industries that are taking the young people and the lure of fast money involved, and you get into this whole crime kick. We really need to look at young people as assets. They are the ones that need to run our corporations, the schools, the hospitals. They will be the future mothers, fathers. They will be the lawyers, the technicians.
What do you do with them now?
I say that we have to, as a community and various communities, we need to really, really look at them as assets. We need to look at them as key components to today and tomorrow. We need to make sure that they are being educated. We need to make sure that there are, and schools are very important in terms of this whole shift that we talked about earlier, to make sure that they are learning the type of skills and abilities that is going to put them squarely into this information age where we find ourselves in. We need to make sure also that young people know that they are cared about. I knew that I was cared about. There was a helping community that not only cared about Alfonso Wyatt, but also had an expectation that he would be someone. That was my parents, and that was that whole community.
Well, how do you then, given what has happened to our communities, Some have been geographically destroyed by urban development. Some of them have been destroyed because of decaying housing. Some of them have been destroyed because of deteriorating family structure. How do we help young folks in the inner city, urban communities to feel that they're cared for?
I think I would suggest something on the scope of a Marshall Plan for cities and for young people in particular, not piecemeal programs.
Okay, well, let's take that, because the Marshall Plan was money that was sent to Germany and Japan to help build them up. Okay, we got this Marshall Plan. What would you do with the money and the resources that come into the inner city to help youth in this Marshall Plan?
I would look at professionalizing the way that youth workers are trained, so that we understand that it's not just happenstance, but that it is a science. And how we can help to train in individual areas that would look the same across the board. That would be one effort. I would look to pull in the public and private sector, new relationships. When we look at school to work programs, I spoke at a program part of Beth Israel Hospital and a high school for health sciences, where young people were doing great things within the hospital setting. I believe that those young people, and I believe that young people that have an agenda, are less likely to commit crimes, less likely to do things to hurt their future when they see or perceive that they have a future. I think that that's part of where that money could go, to let young people know that, yes, you do have a future.
Well, you focus on leadership, and the African proverb, it takes an entire village to educate a child. On the other hand, not everybody in the village has the competence or the skills, or at least know they have the skills to do this. Who are some of your role models as youth leaders? Because you, like others, undoubtedly look to someone else who helped to give you some of this guidance and direction. So who are some of your role models, and then what can folks like you do to help develop other youth leaders?
I've been blessed to meet a number of people who are on the forefront of youth development and youth change. I would have to say that my parents are my first role model. My mother, still alive, my mother and father, they've been involved in ministry to people and to the community. They have been able to use my mother's a real estate broker. She's used one of her properties as a transitional living situation for women coming out of prison. For 27 years, I've seen them help people. I've seen people come to my dinner table for Thanksgiving and Christmas. So that initial help was there and model. I look at a John Betts, I look at a Jeff Canada, I look at some of the people who are in the forefront of change, who are really, really out there. They are creative, they're committed, they're innovative, and they're the ones that give me hope. And over and above all of that is a belief in God, that we are all God's children, and that what we do for the least of these, that is what we are called to do, not to make differences, not to ask how you got poor or why you or this or that. If there is a need, and following in the traditions of my leader, Jesus Christ, if there was a need, touch the need. If there's hunger, feed and resolve the hunger. Do what you must do to develop and to move that person, and recognize that they are precious. That's what I believe is real important.
Well, as a theologian, it's very clear why you'd relate to God and the religious community. But you particularly mentioned Christian religion. A number of Africans are now in the Muslim religion. Some of them are Jewish. Some of them are agnostic. How do you use that umbrella to get everybody together?
I believe that we are all called to be instruments for change and to be lights in dark places, regardless of denomination, regardless of types of religion. It does not matter. And when the whole village, it didn't say part of the village, it didn't say the village that we like, but when the whole village comes together to help that child, whole in terms of integrated and united in spirit, whole in terms of being good role models, being able to be the type of people that can use that type of charisma and relationships to get other people coming together. This is an all hands on deck call. And it is not just for young people in the inner city. when we look at a Kurt Cobain, and when we look at some of what has happened to some young people who are just kind of lost of all colors and stripes, we need to all come together to help our children. After all, we were all children once.
Okay, if you were to be asked to give advice to individuals in our audience as to what individually they could or should do as soon as possible to help youth development, what advice would you give?
I would say that there's a political answer in terms of making sure that our politicians understand that our children are important within the framework of change in this agenda. I would say that volunteerism is real important. I would say that giving money is real important.
Okay, what would you ask them to do tomorrow?
What I would ask them to do tomorrow is, first of all, to recognize that there are probably children in their immediate sphere that they can help. And if they live in an apartment building, it could be an apartment building. If it's in the community, if it's in the church, there's something that somebody can do, and it's not always somebody else's job.
Right.
So they can meet the most immediate need. Because the easy thing to say is, yeah, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do or where to go. That would be the first thing. The second is that I would think, especially in the giving season, about supporting an organization that meets one's approval or philosophy in terms of helping. There's some people that have disposable income. They may be able to start scholarships in the name of a loved one or a family member. There's some people who are able to provide jobs. Somebody listening to this right now has a job that a young person could do. Call the local youth program. Find out where you could find someone that really wants to work, that this job will make a difference in their life.
Well, as the economic situation and the political situation changes, there's going to be more pressure on youth-serving organizations. How can youth-serving organizations respond to that pressure?
There's already a lot of pressure on youth-serving organizations. There's pressure to keep the doors open, to keep the services going on. And if we don't realize that they are an integral part in the economy of this country, then I think some short-sighted policies may save a few dollars later just to give that prison system. You remember I said that the money goes to the furthest concentric circle, more money in that area, and it's easier to say, well, we lost it.
Of course, in discussing youth service, we learned a lot about Alfonso Wyatt. We were very glad that you're in the youth service business, and I know our audience has enjoyed listening to Alfonso discuss youth services in America. Thanks for being with us.